Anyway,
Howdy, how's it going?
good. I just spent some time catching up on Rob's issues, so watched the video. I'm glad I had a chance to watch it because it helped make it easier to understand the issues.
Yeah.
From just reading it. Hey, Rob. But hopefully, I would hope that we could spend some time going over those issues some more today. It's just so I had some quick questions, and then
Yeah, sure.
that can move us forward to like making a decision.
Yeah.
I was just talking about those DB issues, Rob. I had a chance to watch the video from last week, and it really helped make it more clear rather than just reading through them. So I had a couple little questions for each one. Hopefully, we can like come to the decision soon on them.
Okay.
So yeah.
I know I was messaging Greg and he said that he was able to come today. Francis, who's the DevOps guy I met a couple weeks ago, he said he was able to join, but he just lost power earlier today. He's in New Jersey, so he might make it. And then Totally said he was running late. But why don't we give Greg like another minute, and then I know there's a lot to cover today.
Hey,
so
Brennan.
we should try to get started as quickly as close to 2 as possible. Hey, Brendan.
Hey, what's up, guys?
All right. At 2:04, we should just start. Exactly. We need like hold music or something.
We need Tully's fans just running in the background.
Oh, Greg just emailed me saying he's going to be a couple of minutes late. Okay, we should just get started. Some of this stuff might not even concern some of the others. Does everyone have the agenda open? There's a link in the chat, in the Zoom chat.
I think the link was broken for me. It's to a Trello card now. Is that correct?
It's in the Zoom announcement. There's a Trello, but there's also just the direct link to the Google Doc. I didn't test the Trello link.
It's probably because it's private, the Trello. That's another outstanding issue.
There it is. Well, hey, the Google Doc's here and working, so great.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just quickly to recap. So here's the job description that people should, for the developers, that will be funded by Packard and hopefully supplemented by Doris Duke. Packard we should be hearing about very soon. I think it's in compliance right now. And that's a good sign that they had some questions. The compliance questions weren't about the webmapping stuff. I think it was about more of the interviewing work. So, and they were easily answered. So nothing is at risk, but it's good that sort of, it sounds like it's moving along on their side. So, these job descriptions are sort of hard because, you never find someone who can do everything except for like the Robs of the world, but those are rare. So if we can, I think a good strategy might be just to look for like, these are the things we're working on, and, hopefully they can check a few of the boxes and then they can tell us which ones, and then we can try to figure out, how do we get the best coverage for what we need. I don't know, we can talk about it more, but I do know that there was like some technical issues that we wanted to talk to too. So if anyone has questions, I'm sure we can follow up on that later. Or you can just like write in edits into the doc itself. The same thing goes with the next grant proposal for the timeline. And I'm just putting it in there. Feel free to look at the text and edit that, but then also the narrative text, but there's also like a proposed timeline. It's pretty, I tried to make it as flexible as possible. And, they're asking for, it's a 2-year grant. And and they were asking for, you know, like milestones in 2019, which is just really hard to do. So I tried to keep things vague, and it was also based on the stuff that we put in the Packard grant a few months ago. And so, just trying to give us as much flexibility as possible, and make it realistic based on, say, a part-time person sort of, and any other volunteer contributions working like this year and next year. There shouldn't be anything in there too surprising. It's just mostly, again, like getting off the third-party vendors, and then, potentially working with some close partners, and, just general maintenance and things like that too. As well as, I think also, trying to make sure that we're sort of good stewards in the open source community. And then we need a web monitoring point of contact for that, and also the terms of service, terms of use. In terms of uses for the DCMA, that you need to have an agent listed. If no one, that might be a larger conversation that I can bring up with the others who aren't on the call. But if it happens to be me, then that's fine too. I just wasn't sure who the best person for that should be. And then just quickly, for next week, it'd be great if we could start a little early to do that monthly sort of product manager check-in review. And we can maybe confirm that now or afterwards when we have everyone on the call. And then finally, I moved all the archived meeting notes into G Drive. I know there was some talk in one of the GitHub issues about moving it somewhere else, but for now, I think it's just a better use of our time if we just keep it there. And if we make another move, we can do that all at once. But it's just a lot of cutting and pasting. And if this works okay for now, I suggest we just leave it there. And then, I talked to Rico from Query and Brendan through Slack about more collaboration, and it sounds like we want to put in a slightly more formal process in place, which is fine. Our immediate needs aren't really in sync with what Query can offer, but they can continue working on these more research-oriented one-off projects like stuff with Freezer, and that stuff with like the EIS, which isn't really web monitoring, but I guess that's going to be the model that we'll be looking at. And then, some of the best practices docs I'm still trying to work through. I just got saddled with a lot of the funding writing and the grant calls too. Cool. Any questions with that? I know I sort of zipped through it, but I'm trying to leave time for the technical conversations. Okay. Okay, so why don't we leave the analyst updates for later? For me, I have the health check revisions still working on. I just need to do some formatting. There was some NumPy formatting, which I wasn't aware of that I need to do, but everything else is sort of working, I think. So I'll try to do that as quickly as possible and send another PR. Rob, should we jump into those 3 tickets? I know you moved them to ready, but I think Kevin had some questions too. What's the best way to start that conversation? Kevin, do you want
to ask questions? I moved them to ready because they're ready to be talked about and not in a giant icebox pile of like random things.
Right.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
They're confusing because they're both discussion and implementation needed, and I didn't mean ready for somebody to implement.
Okay.
I just wanted them to be in the set of things that were highlighted as
ready,
actively in the space of like availability for
we need to
discussion, whatever.
Yeah, this is on deck.
I can just begin with like what I kind of understood, maybe what I understood, and then Rob can just fill in if I misunderstood or if there's gaps and stuff. I'll start with the first one that I understood the most well and seems most important to like the UI side, which is the include versions, like getting rid of that. Because we're pulling too many versions right now and it's just going to explode in the future. So the question that I had is that in the
And that's, sorry to interrupt, that's 264, right?
I don't know the number. Yeah.
Like include,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
remove include versions. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then I noticed in the conversation issue that Rob said that that's used right now to create the analyst spreadsheets. So if
Mhm.
that's removed, like what would you do instead to create the spreadsheets?
So then we would hit the actual like list versions for each page endpoint,
Oh, okay.
which we already do, but we use it explicitly to get the earliest version. So we ask for a chunk size of 1 and an ordering of capture time ascending.
Okay.
But now we would just ask for everything and in whatever order.
Capture time. Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because we need the ones from the time, or we do 2 requests. We do the same one that we currently do to get the earliest, and then we do 1 request for the time frame that we care about.
Mm-hmm.
That
Oh,
might be
okay.
easier because then we don't have to do any filtering in the script. Anyway, yeah. So because right now what we do is we just say, get me all the pages that had captures in this time frame, which we can continue to do. That's fine, but we add the include versions because what a row in that spreadsheet is like some page information and then some information about the most recent non-error version. So we can't just say include latest, because if the latest was an error, we look for the second latest, the third latest, or whatever, so long as it's within the time frame.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, so it totally makes sense to remove it. And then on the UI side, I guess all I really need to do is hit that same version, like page ID versions endpoint to fill in the drop downs. I guess the other question was like how to make that like usable, because if a page has 1,000 versions, like that person doesn't really want to look through that. And so I think one of the options was like just the 10, like the latest 10 or whatever. And then, so that sounds okay. But there was, a side discussion of like, that's related to that whole latest to base and what's actually base. And because, you could get the earliest version, but that could be from 6 years ago. And we don't care about that anymore because that's so long ago. We're not comparing about that right now, right?
Right.
So would it make sense to have kind of like a temporary filter where it's just like we get all versions from like inauguration day, because that's just what we care about right now, just for the time being, like maybe the day before and then all the versions that are newer than that? Would that make sense?
Sure.
For the drop down.
I want to make sure first that we're not confusing a bunch of things. The latest 10 thing was about still providing an include versions mechanism in the API, which should be an entirely 100% separate question of like how we handle a gajillion versions being present in the UI, like how we display it and make it navigable. It's a totally different question from how we make it navigable to a program. So
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so the latest 10 thing was about the API. It was about it as an alternative to just totally getting rid of that feature, because it does provide a big simplification in workflow and performance boost, because you can get a lot more data without the overhead of like another request or another 5 requests or another 500 requests. So it is valuable, but like we need to, if we wanted to keep it, we need to have a way to filter it down to a limited set rather than just everything. And to do that, it needs to also be formatted differently so that we can clarify that it is a limited set. It's not just everything.
That's the relationships object that you're talking about with like links to next chunks and previous chunks and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah, because the relationships idea is like you just took the API response from the actual like versions endpoint and just like stuck it in there, so it has all the all the envelope of the additional stuff that you'd get.
I like that idea. So having that, I think, is useful. And then, so I think on the UI side, I can just point to the versions path, and then, we'll filter it on the inauguration day for now, I guess. Or we'll talk to the analysts, but I thought that as an easy way just to make it manageable instead of them having to look through like thousands of versions.
Well, we probably wanted to start before then.
Yeah.
Because the question is usually really the question the analyst is answering is how does this compare to what it was before the Trump administration?
Yeah.
Or
So
like the last
probably-
version. Which,
Yeah.
Right.
What? There's no good way to answer that question. I mean, we had that like bookmark feature, which is a way to answer that question, but we don't have that feature. That's like pie in the sky. Nobody wanted to solve it yet.
Yeah, I think that's far future right now. I could totally go to the next analyst meeting and just ask them like, what's a good cutoff time so that they just get things after a certain time.
I would just go with November 2017, like November 1st, because I think November is about the time that we started capturing stuff with Versionista.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Is that right, Tully? Or not 2016.
Yeah.
Not 2017.
So long ago. Okay. So does that seem resolved for you then, Rob?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that staves off the amount of time before like number of versions becomes a horrifying, painful problem. So that's good. We do still need to answer that question, but that is 100% separate question from the things in these issues. So
yeah. Okay.
I think the bigger thing here is, do we want to get rid of it, or do we want to do that alternative relationships thing?
I vote for the relationships thing. I don't know if anybody else has. Ray, do you have any opinion?
Yeah, I agree. Especially because we might, we don't want to lose some functionality in terms of like how we're generating the sheets. And so the relationships would help us maintain that, right?
So nothing, I don't think there's anything that's using that functionality that really, really, really needs it. Because the sheet generation it runs in the middle of the night once a week. If it takes longer than the like 20 seconds it currently takes, it's not that big a deal.
Right.
It could take 3 hours, it'd be no problem. And we're not talking about anything on that scale of increase. So I wouldn't want to be concerned about it from that perspective.
Okay.
It is a useful behavior, and if we want to keep it because it's helpful and because there's other theoretical uses in the future that it would be really helpful for, that's a good reason to keep it. But we shouldn't keep it just because we're worried about losing some functionality. We're not losing anything that's a problem to lose.
Right.
From like a technical standpoint.
What would be the level of work for the for adding this alternative?
So my concerns around adding the alternative are we need to, I mean, probably realistically, we can just pick a number like 10 and it'll probably be fine. The concern is like if you ask for the maximum chunk size, which I think is 1,000, then is the hardware we're operating on the servers enough memory and speed to not have a problem when the response contains 10,000 objects or 11,000 objects instead of 1,000 objects? Because we have to have it not crash if somebody asks for that, and I think it is. So that's not a big deal, but we should check that. We don't have to be super rigorous because I think if we just say 10, it'll probably be fine, and that'll cover most use cases. And then the other part of it is we have to totally rejigger the way queries work when you ask for that feature. Because what we do right now is we just return all the versions, which is a really simple query. It's just a join. But you can't do just a join and limit it to only join up to so many records ordered this way per thing on the left side of the join. There's no facility for that in SQL. So you have to write a way more complex query or set of queries. So it'll have to be a query with subqueries, or it'll have to just be a giant pile of queries. It'll be slower, but I'm not worried about the fact that it'll be slower, because the point is that it's saving you it's saving you 100 extra requests, and the overhead of those requests is much higher than the time overhead of doing that one long request, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's probably a fair amount of work in rejiggering the queries. It means we will have to throw away the lightweight query functionality we have, which drastically reduces memory and increases performance. But it'll also make the whole thing more understandable to not have that anyway.
That's what I've been working on the last week, is that whole section. Just trying to understand it better.
Okay. I can answer high level or low level questions about it. The summary of it, because it is confusing, is basically that our budget is tiny, and Active Records budget is huge.
Okay.
And basically, if you asked for a large number of records and you were including versions, then quite frequently, the servers we are on much better servers now, and we will hopefully be moving to much, much better servers. But when we were on very shitty Heroku servers with a very shitty database, one of the database or Active Record would often take too long or run out of memory and get killed by the scheduler. And so basically I said, I need to take Active Record out of the equation for these queries. So that set of methods, realistically, if I were being dumber about it, I could have just written SQL queries and it might have been easier. But I tried to have a unified way to set up a query. So what it does is, lightweight query is all about figuring out how to translate an Active Record query proxy into an actual query and then understand the results that it would be asking for.
Okay.
So it builds the JSON compatible result set directly from the SQL output.
Okay. And as far as like relationship for like AREL and stuff like that, or any of the other SQL builders, was there a reason to like skip that and stick mostly with Active Record, or?
Well, most of what lightweight query is doing is on the opposite side of the equation from where AREL is, because AREL is helping you develop the SQL query. And lightweight query is just, it is doing very little to ask the query proxy, which you could have actually built with AREL, I think, and it would still work. It's asking that for the SQL that it's gonna output, and then it runs that SQL. And most of what lightweight query is doing is on the other side of saying, all right, I get back an array of rows, like let me parse those rows and build objects from them and build the tree of related objects from them.
Okay.
So AREL is solving before you make the query, it's composing the query, and lightweight query is solving the parsing of the results into something useful.
Okay.
Without actually building.
Taking the data stream from the database and reprocessing it.
Yeah, I shouldn't say we're taking Active Record out of the equation. We're taking Active Model out of the equation.
Okay.
So we're not building models from the results. We're just building dicts or hashes and pooping them out.
Okay.
I mean, realistically, like we could probably get rid of it and we would actually be okay now. But but it was solving a critical, we don't have the infrastructure problem
Yeah.
for it.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that in a bit, I guess.
Kevin?
I was gonna-
Yeah,
was
go
gonna-
ahead, Kevin.
Just to finish off the include versions issue. So it sounds like we don't need that like for different functions like building the spreadsheet in the UI anymore. But then the relationships thing we can maybe open an issue for and like implement it when it's time, like nice to have or when we need it right now. So, okay, I think I propose that because it
Yeah, if
sounds
it's,
a
if
lot
it's
more complicated to implement.
Yeah, it is
Right.
a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. So I think
I mean,
we're
it's not
gonna need
obscenely complicated, but it's more complicated.
right. Yeah, but when time is a scarce resource, so it sounds like for this we're going to remove the option, write an issue for the relationships, and take it from there.
Yeah. And then just like the different things to work without the option.
Right. Cool. That's great.
And I guess the other thing worth mentioning there, I know I, in passing, made a comment about JSON API, which
Yeah.
you brought up, right? Just to more clearly explain, if people haven't looked at JSON API, it's a standardized way of formatting JSON responses for a set of model objects like ours. And we follow its envelope structure, but not its structure for formatting an object. The relationships concept comes from JSON API. And it's a little bit weird to shove in there because we don't follow that part of JSON API. So the salient thing basically is JSON API, you get back the way you structure an object within that envelope. So we keep the same envelope, but the way we structure an object is different. We just say, we got an object with these properties. And JSON API says an object is an ID, potentially a set of relationships, potentially a set of attributes, and there's like one or two other things. But we would have to take everything that we have, except the ID, and move it in one level of nesting under a set of attributes. And we would have to rename our UUIDs to ID. But otherwise it would basically be the same at that point. But it is a very different structure for each object, which is why it's not an easy change to make. It's not hard to do technically. It's hard because it's a completely changing the response format for a client.
Is that essentially just making it a lazy evaluation on the IDs to traverse the object graph?
Sorry, I'm not quite following what you mean.
Oh, I wasn't sure what the earlier part was, so I'm just kind of grabbing from what you just said. So when you have an object that's dependent on IDs and relationships, usually it's a lazy evaluation of some type that you're going to say, with this ID, I'm then going to execute some function that will go grab the remaining information and then join it at that ID. And that is traversing an object graph.
JSON API does have a facility for modeling. You can model relationships as nested, so they're directly concretized there, or you can model them as a separate set of related objects that occur later in the envelope of the response. So you have the main data, and then you have the other objects, the related objects. I forget what the actual name of the property is.
It's like referenced to them, or like pointers or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So it does allow you to dereference that way, to include the dereferenced version or to keep them separate as references. For this particular case, there's no like cross relationships, so there's not a whole lot to gain from keeping them separate. But if we included like user data, you'd want to do it for that, like who
Okay.
this or something. Yeah.
Okay.
So then, I know we keep on trying to close this one. would it make sense then, instead of writing an issue for the relationship, just to do like maybe the JSON API fully down the road? Or is that even a larger work? Maybe we do it tiered or something.
I think that is a much larger question.
Okay.
If we wanted to do it, it's better to do it like sooner-ish, because we probably don't have any external clients besides maybe whatever the data kind folks are doing. But
Yeah, I wouldn't
I mean,
worry
it's
too much about
easier
that.
to completely change your response format if nobody's depending on your response format.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, that's a complicated change because it's about other people who are using the API.
Right. Okay. That's good to know. That's helpful. But I guess even in the short term, maybe, I mean, I take your point. Your point is well taken, but we don't have that many users, and I don't think clients, and we don't have that many people clamoring to use it yet. So I think there's time to sort of punt on it.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. All right.
We should not worry about it right now because it's a really big
Yeah.
change with a lot of implications and needs a process for managing it.
Yeah.
But we should not punt on it too long if we think
Right.
we want to do it,
Okay.
because that process is smaller the sooner we do it.
Yes. Yeah. When you have, yeah, we're not messing anyone's workflow up. That's a good point. Cool. Kevin.
Before I continue with the other two issues, I just, in the interest of respecting people's time, if Tolly and Brendan have stuff they want to update and take off, and Rob, do you still have time to talk about it for like 15 minutes too?
Mhm.
Okay. Tolly, Brendan, you guys have anything you want to say before you drop off?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I actually don't think there are any big updates since last week. I think we're just making good incremental progress on a few fronts and reports. There's a kind of big new finding. BLM seems to have dropped some pages about renewable energy. They call it renewable energy data, but really it's kind of like renewable energy aggregate statistics. And we're trying to understand, Justin Shell is leading that, trying to understand what really was taking off and what seems like maybe it was a result of some rulemaking. Other than that, there's a incoming looming deadline for us to finish up the Clean Power Plan comment, proposed repeal comment, and Eric is still doing some pretty good stuff with the term and link analysis. So that's all.
Cool. And totally, in case you missed it, in the agenda, I have links to like a draft job description and also the Doris Duke proposal. So there's like a timeline they wanted and some outcomes. That's always like the trickiest because, like, I don't know, these foundations haven't grappled with like the idea that roadmaps are these very fungible things when you're dealing with technology. But I know we're running along too, but let's try to catch up on that after this call whenever you're able.
Yeah, and it would be, sorry if I didn't see this already, but it would be good to just flag it for the analysts, especially the Doris Duke proposal, just to see if anyone wants to engage in the process.
Okay.
Not necessarily saying like everyone give us input, but if someone wants to kind of engage, then they can.
Sure. That's a good point. I can do that.
Me next?
Yeah. Bren?
Like unmute and wait.
Very.
Yeah, so quick updates on our side. We hopefully you guys saw there's some DM message happening. We fired off what we think are complete lists. I made a full check scan of basically, okay, start from the beginning. That recipe that we've been working on to generate sitemaps, I've evolved it into a command line tool that includes a bunch of utilities that you would want when working with the tool itself. So it sort of has, who's psychedelic shirt? What? Right? You have a psychedelic shirt? What's going on here? Oh, you're muted.
You're just seeing like moire patterns and you're
Yeah, I see. Gotcha. Yeah, I'm not seeing that, or maybe I'm just bad at seeing things. Anyways, if you're all interested, we've sort of taken that the next logical set of steps for that sitemap generation tool. So not only does it include a crawler now, but it has a technique to sort of check which links have not been visited by that crawler and generate a list out of that. And more importantly, a tool to check the inbound links. So you give it any link. And the most important thing there is that the inbound link checker that we've written follows the URL normalization strategy used by the URL generator itself, which is important because if you're saying, hey, I want to give you this raw URL and I want to see how many times it occurs, if you don't follow our same normalization techniques, you won't get the right results. And so this tool, I just finished pushing some changes, but it's working right now. Last crawl showing 97,226 or 9,700. No, 97,226 URLs that were HTML valid. I don't know what the total link count is, but looks like as far as I could tell, the sitemap became as complete as I could possibly get it to be at that given point in time, which included a number of times where we actually iterated through the entire list of known URLs and then went and fetched anything else that was missing and just sort of left the machine for a couple of hours. So it's the closest I can think to being a complete record. Which has me much more confident in deriving stuff from the data sets that we delivered from that Dropbox sort of folder. On top of that, there's that command line tool now includes some basic stat generating tools. So like you can see how many links are there, how many are inbound, what are the content types, what were the status responses of those different URLs. So like some of them like 403, some of them were, how many of them are redirects. A silly number of those URLs are redirects, like a truly silly number of them. And so yeah. So that tool is up. It's not documented properly, and it is unfortunately written in Go. But if any of you need it, you should be able to download it, compile it, and it has a help command that'll let you sort of work with it in the meantime. And we're going to use this as a sort of springboard for writing the actual web app. And that was based off of a lot of the stuff that we were discussing in that chat. So now we have the code to sort of like do the web app checking, and now we just basically all we have to do is wire it up to a server. And so it's sort of coming along nicely. I think we should have that up. I would not be surprised if we don't have a web app that analysts can, or we could play with potentially to give analysts next week. And then from there, start thinking about, we'll host that for now, and then we'll go from there. But yeah, so that's our update. Oh, and in terms of the comment that you're submitting, if Eric needs any help with that, or if we can make ourselves available to make Eric's work easier, please let us know. I'd be more than happy to take a list of URLs that need checking and to see how many inbound links there are, or check them against the 2 records that we have that we think are complete. Be happy to do any of that. Anything we can do to help on that.
And just for a little filler, Greg, the analyst team is writing a public comment to the Clean Power Plan repeal. So we're using some of the data from various sources that we've been collecting, including Brendan's work on that comment.
Oh, very cool.
Cool. Thank you, Brendan. Kevin, more questions?
Yeah, sure. So the second issue that I think should be quick to resolve, it's the one about a flag to create pages or not. And so my understanding is the script is basically to make it not have to ping a bunch of times. It's looking at URLs within a domain. And then sometimes some of those URLs are ones that we aren't tracking, right? Rob, is that the problem? Okay, so then when we import it, we just want to say, don't create a page for this version. And if there isn't, and because it doesn't create a page, it just throws out that version, which is a URL that we're probably not tracking, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because if we're tracking tens of thousands of pages, but only across 50 domains, we'd rather make 50 requests to Internet Archive rather than 30,000 requests to Internet Archive.
Yeah.
Pages.
My only question would be, is there any chance that there would be a version that we pick up that we're tracking but didn't have a page yet, and then that would be missed? Is that possible?
If we're tracking it, then we will have created a page record for it.
Okay.
That is a relevant question if we add a new page that we want to track. Then we need to manually create a page record with no versions in it, which is fine. The system handles that fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, other than that, it makes sense to just create that flag to throw out all those versions we're not tracking. That was my one question. Was like, oh, what happens? Yeah, but cool. And then, so the last one about the unchanged stuff, I think that's a little larger. Is it kind of related? We had a small conversation on the processing side about like skipping unchanged stuff. Is this kind of
related?
The logic to skip unchanged is that they would both do the same thing, kind of, or no?
They would do kind of the same thing. So basically the problem is like we can do a little bit of the skipping on the processing side, but not all of it because of the URL normalization part. So like Brendan was saying, if you have two different things cataloging data, they both have to use the same normalization scheme to be able to understand each other's stuff. And the problem is we can't use Internet Archive's normalization because there's no way we can ever guarantee that we will necessarily always be in sync with them. And it is pretty hard for us to share our normalization because we don't have a unified stack of languages, so we can't just share libraries. And it's also always possible that someone might be running a different version of a client with a different normalization library version than the server, which is actually doing all the importing of data. So the idea is basically just to say processing can do a little bit of very conservative skipping, or it can give up altogether. It doesn't matter. And it would just send everything to the importer and would just say, just import all of this stuff. And it's up to the importer to say, I don't care about these 5 because they're the same as the one that immediately preceded them.
Yeah. So I was going to say for that processing issue, does it just make sense to just try to import everything? And then because we're going to try to handle skipping and stuff on the DB side, is it useful to have all those different flags still?
So the value is in reducing the amount of work, assuming that we do want to not create records for consecutive same content versions. Assuming that's the case, there's a value in doing a conservative version of that on the processing side, because even a conservative version can cut out a huge amount of stuff. And all of that has to go over a wire, whether it's a short or a long wire, and then it all has to be processed on the other side. And every record that we go to import involves a lot of database lookups and processing, because we have to do the normalization. We have to look up and see whether that page exists. If it doesn't exist, create the page. And then once we have the page, then we have to look up its most recent version in time previous to what we're importing. So it's not just like, what's the latest? And then like compare that hash and then figure out what to do. So like the amount of processing for each record, I mean, it still happens fast, right? But it's not insignificant. So it'd be nice to have fewer records to process.
Okay. And then I'm sorry, I'm lingering on the processing issue. It's just the one that we were like I was thinking about the most at the time. But it seemed like the question was like how we should filter, to skip records, like whether it was on the response or the resolved response, because it could be redirected a billion times. And then
sorry.
I was just like, but in either case, like how we choose to skip, we would save like the response, whether it was a redirection and all the redirection, right?
Yes. For anything that we import, we would still import the same stuff, which in the Internet Archive case includes a record of all the redirect hops involved.
Yeah. So that's why my question then in the issue was like, do we need to or do we want to skip on the response because of a permanent redirect? You know, we wouldn't be following a permanent redirect. So because we're saving all that redirection information, is it still makes sense to try to skip on the response?
So this partially comes back to the pain of having a bunch of separated tools rather than one code base that does all the things. Because if this were really about like kicking off a job on a job server that goes and imports stuff, it'd be like, just have it do whatever the database, not pass it to our DB. It's conceptually a part of the DB, even if it's running physically on a different machine. And so you just have it do the right things. But because it's a totally separate piece of software that we're putting out there for people to use for whatever use cases, and it's already written in a very abstracted way from the DB, there's a lot of reasons you might want to use it for any of those three cases of types of deduplication.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that makes sense. It's hard for me to separate the two, but yeah, we have to think of them as separate tools that people would just use.
That is the cost of writing it as totally separate code bases.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean the basic thing is, and there are also potentially all three modes that are useful to us, depending on what we want to do, right? Because if we cared about only keeping changed versions, which is sort of what we're trying to do right now, but we switched the structure of the database to be about actual responses rather than about resolved responses. So it behaved more like Internet Archive in that sense, rather than how Versionista behaves. And there's a lot of good reasons we might want to do that. Then you would want the type of deduplication we have today, which is a problem for us today, but it's what you would want if you made that change. So it makes sense to preserve that functionality, even if it's not the default, and we'll just switch the default to what we actually want, which is deduping based on the resolved content.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, I'll throw in, just because basically what you were asking in that was just like what the flag should kind of be. So I'll just throw in my preference into the issue later on. but I just really needed to understand like what was happening. That's all.
I hope this is clear and not just more confusing.
No.
It's a little bit
clear.
thorny.
It is clear. Okay, and then for the last, so then going back to the DB issue, then now like, okay, processing side is somehow filtering it a little bit for us, but we're still deciding to like, do it on the DB import side. I guess. Yeah, I totally agree with it, I guess. Or just the proposal that you have right now. I guess my questions were more with the processing and how that would interact with this, but just overall, the proposal that you have makes sense to me. So I would go with it.
Okay, it seems like people are locking down on that primary proposal rather than the alternative at the same time as I am moving away from my primary proposal towards the alternative. so that's fine. That's what we can do.
Yeah. It's hard because I kind of gauge my things on the interest of time, like time, because don't know who can help with like these like long far feature, like if they're actually going to be executed. That's why. That's my bias.
I understand that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a valid bias. I mean,
Greg, do you have? Does that help? I know like you're in the DB stuff, so I don't know if you had any thoughts or.
I didn't have any at the moment. I'm mostly just listening to your comments, and I was going to get back to the issue 266 and read it afterwards and provide commentary after I had time to think about it.
Okay. We can leave it for a little longer so people have time to get feedback.
Yeah.
So I think the Python, the processing side one is more straightforward. There's not an alternative proposal. It's just what are the names?
Yeah. Okay. I'm
Cool.
done.
So then with 266, we haven't really decided if we're going, or are we going to go with the proposal rather than the alternative for now?
Well, I think it sounded like Greg wanted to take some time to make sure he understood it and figure out if he wanted to provide some feedback. So
Okay, that's fine.
I'll definitely give you some feedback like this afternoon rather than like 3 days from now.
okay.
Okay.
In absence of that, it sounds like you and Kevin are heavily on the side of do the main proposal, which is throw away things that are unchanged.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so Greg, I know you were working on some stuff. Do you have questions?
Well, most of them I presume are going to be answered once I read through 266 and get it in my head.
Right. Oh, but I also meant on any other issues, like stuff you're working on as well.
Yeah, well, the issue of the light query in the versions and changes models, those were, I was really trying to figure out the best way of handling the things, and I was also looking at the actual web API definition, our Swagger file, which I talked to Rob a little bit over the weekend, or last week sometime, about what we could do about that, since there seems to be a lot of issue over the dynamics of the API. And I was wondering if some other way of defining it might be a little bit easier that would be more dynamic to the needs of the clients rather than how we're defining it in the service. Kind of invert it a little bit. GraphQL is what jumped to mind, but I wasn't sure if it was a good fit, so I was investigating that.
Yeah, I think I said this to you, but that was definitely something I'd thought about before, and it seemed a little too speculative and far away at the time. But if you're interested in like exploring that, awesome. So
I think it seems intuitively like a good fit for what we're trying to do. Just in terms of having more dynamic queries, so we can say things like, I only need so much data, I need data with these particular conditions, which seems to be the large component of this conversation, as what are the queries that we need to define at what time, and if we can make them more expressive than a standard REST API, then we might be able to make things a little easier for ourselves in the long run.
yeah, I mean, I had the same thought that it seems like intuitively a nice fit. I think one of the things when I looked at it briefly, because I haven't ever actually done a GraphQL implementation, is it's pretty open, or doesn't provide a whole lot of spec or facilities around very complicated filtering. So it provides a good way for asking for the relationships in which sets of things you want. But a huge amount of the work in our system is about like, okay, how do you ask for a given date range, or a given like all kinds of various ways to filter. In some of those, we still have to invent differently in a way that fits with GraphQL.
Okay.
So make sure you think about that as you're figuring out how to do it, I guess.
That is exactly what I'm starting my investigation in.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd just add that if it sounds like you guys are having some overfetching and underfetching problems between your front end and back end, and that is what GraphQL was designed for, and so it's worth noting that like you achieve this separation between the two, where front end devs can finally write queries that really shape and drive all the way down into the actual. Eventually, they translate to SQL under the hood, and that can lead to much more efficient usage of the wire and much more efficient usage of, particularly if that backend service is in turn calling some other backend service. But I've been through 2 GraphQL implementations. One of the things you run into is, unless you have somebody teed up who's like really fired up to use this thing and like ready to consume that API, it tends to be a lot of overhead to like implement And so I'm a big fan of recommending saying, get your JSON API in place, get your Swagger file really sweet and set up, and and you guys are there. So this is a great place to have this conversation. But just be sure that you have somebody who is ready to consume that GraphQL API on the other end.
Okay. May I ask what the implementation languages were when you did the two GraphQL implementations?
Yeah, one was in Go, and then the other one was Elixir, of all things. And so that was a completely different. I didn't touch a lick of that code, but yeah, I've touched it in Go. I've written one in Go.
Was the did the type system help in Go, or was it just an awkward marriage?
I tend to be a strongly typed thinker, so my biases are pretty much somewhere on this part of my sleeve, and so I find strong typing super helpful.
I mean specifically with the GraphQL relationship.
Yeah, I think
it provides a type system. Go has a type system. I mean, Elixir is dynamically typed, but
yeah, it definitely there, no big deal. I mean, the biggest challenge with Go is the mapping between like serialization formats and strong typing, which GraphQL alleviates a lot of that, so it's really nice. But I think so really got his thumb on the pulse of this one, where some things just really aren't graph relationships, and then trying to sort of shoehorn them into graph relationships can sometimes be challenging. But I think if you're interested in investigating that, Greg, it's a really great idea to sort of like check down that tree, because the benefits it can give in the front end back end relationship and the cost benefit that can deliver if you have your entire pipe that clean is really nice.
Okay, maybe I'll do that. Okay,
that was a good smirk, Greg. Cool. Do you have any other updates on what you've been keeping busy with? No.
Mostly reading. Just I do a lot of reading before writing.
Okay. You need to do one.
So I try to do the simple ones, like the allow hosts, which just doesn't involve much of anything else.
Right. Cool. Sounds good. Excellent. Yeah. Thanks again for the extended time. And speaking of, it'd be great next week to start at 1:30. If that time doesn't work for people, let me know. We can come up with another time. We can still stick to the 2 o'clock, but it'd be great just to do another product manager review and do some planning, just because I think, things are in flux with shifting roles and incoming grant money and things like that. And so it's just, a little more planning would be great. Just, tough when we're all distributed working on part-time basis. But with that, any other final words from anyone? Okay. And then, cool. That sounds good. And then, just quickly too, Rob, if we could link up later this week, if you have any time, that'd be great too. If you can't be online, even Slack, just a quick Slack chat would be helpful, just to check in on some stuff. Cool. All right.
I'll see what I can figure out. I've been super busy. Sorry, I haven't been on Slack in like half a week at least.
Okay. Yeah. I'll be flexible with your time. Just let me know. My evenings, if you need to do it later for you, that's really cool too. I'll work around your schedule.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.